Hello, and welcome to yet another episode of the Indologia podcast, in which we are going to talk about the Khilafat movement. Now, I have made posts and reels about it in the past, and I'm pretty certain that most of you have read about this Khilafat movement in your school textbooks. Very innocently, these textbooks confuse the Khilafat movement with the non cooperation movement and call it one of the greatest movements and the de facto point in our recent history in which Mr. Gandhi became a superstar. Thanks to the internet and the social media in the last 10 years, many true facts about this Khilafat movement have come out in public. Now we know very clearly that this Khilafat movement was not just a failure, but it was a huge blunder on Mr. Gandhi's part. Yet, even those of us who know about this, who know that this was a failure, we don't exactly know what happened. We don't exactly know what went wrong, who were the main players, where exactly this thing started going wrong. And most of all, 100 years from then, as we sit here today, what lessons does it have for us? Because I assure you, it has a lot of lessons for us. And as you listen to this podcast, I would urge you to find any similarities between the religio-political scene of 100 years ago and what we have now. The book that I'll be using as a source for this episode is called The Tragic Story of Partition. It's an excellent book written by Mr. H.V. Seshadri. If you want to know about the history of the partition and the 40 years before that, this is an excellent book which has a ton of good resources and brilliant research. The close of the First World War had given rise to certain new forces affecting the internal situation of Bharat. Forces issuing mainly from the British policy of dismembering the Turkish Empire after the war. During the war, Britain, with a view of weakening Turkey from within, made tempting offers of independent statehood to certain states under the Turkish sovereignty to be fulfilled after the close of the war. And after the defeat of Germany and Turkey in the war, the British set up Arabia, which was till then a part of the Turkish Empire. A separate independent state of Arabia was set up. Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, and Iraq also became independent states, shaking off the Turkish hegemony. And at the same time, Mustafa Kemal Pasha, a highly gifted revolutionary leader, rose in Turkey and brushed aside the corrupt and weak regime of the Caliph. And he resolved to build a new and powerful Turkey on modern nationalist lines. And the Caliph was the dynastic Sultan of Turkey till then, and he was looked upon as the temporal representative of Allah and the religious head of the entire Islamic world. But revolutionary Kemal Pasha decided to purge his country of Arabism and liberate it from the stranglehold of mullahs and Maulvis. He put down with an iron hand the opposition from the Islamic zealots to his measures. And in this radical step, Kemal Pasha was reinforced by the ideological foundation for progressive reforms in the Muslim world laid by Jamaluddin Afghani, who was an Arab born in Afghanistan, who had attacked the autocratic rule of the Turkish Caliphate, which, he said, had stifled the intellectual progress of the Muslims. From the day Turkey joined the German camp, Muslims in Bharat also began swerving away from the British. And when, after the close of the war, the Turkish Empire was dismembered and the Caliph's sovereignty breathed its last, the Muslims' ire against the British took a new edge. For the first time now, Muslims remembered Hindus. For they very well knew that without the latter's cooperation, they could not hope to put up a powerful resistance against the British. Maulana Abdul Bari, speaking in the Khilafat conference, declared, "The Muslims' honor would be at stake if they forget the cooperation of the Hindus. I, for my part, will say that we should stop cow killing, irrespective of their cooperation, because we are children of the same soil. As a Maulvi, I say that involuntarily stopping cow killing, we shall not offend against the canons of our religion. Nothing has so hurt the Hindu-Muslim unity as the Hindus' cooperation with us on the question of Khilafat." Now, perhaps there is some opportunistic hypocrisy in this, some would say, because many a times, more than once, especially in the last 100 years, the Muslim community has stressed upon the importance of killing cows. And yet, at this point of history, when they needed the help of the Hindus, the cooperation of the Hindu society, they very conveniently decided that they don't need to kill cows anymore. Al-Taqiyya maybe? The Muslim League, in its session in December 1919, discussed at length the issue of Khilafat injustice and invited the Congress leaders to join hands with them. Most of the eminent Congress leaders, like Motilal Nehru, Madan Mohan Malviya, and Gandhi, responded with great enthusiasm and joined the discussions. All of them firmly believed that here was a golden opportunity to wean the Muslims away from the British fold and draw them into the Congress camp. Motilal Nehru, who was then the Congress president, he said, "It is impossible for one part of the nation to stand aloof, while the other part is suffering from a serious grievance." Mohandas Gandhi gave an ideological footing to the whole issue of Khilafat. He said, "The Khilafat agitation does not center around an individual, but around an idea, which is at once temporal, spiritual, and political. If the Muslims of the world do not, by their power of opinion and active sympathy, stand by the Turks, both they and the latter will suffer irretrievably. Such an event will be a calamity for the world, for I believe that Islam has its place in the world as much as Christianity and every other religion. Chivalry demands the support for the Turks in the hour of their need." So what Mr. Gandhi said is that the Hindus should be chivalrous and help the Turks because they have suffered in the First World War. Well, so did the British because they fought a very long and important war and they were probably weakened by it. Then shouldn't the Indian society fight the British Raj to set themselves free instead of fighting for the freedom of the Turks? Mr. Gandhi continued, "The Khilafat question gave the two communities the opportunity of a lifetime to unite. If the Hindus wish to cultivate eternal friendship with Muslims, they must perish with them in the attempt to vindicate the honor of Islam." This is what lack of Shatrubodh looks like. And to the Muslims, Gandhi said, "Arise, awaken, or be forever fallen." Gandhi followed up his words with actions. He came forward to lead the Khilafat agitation himself. The Congress party met at an emergent session in Calcutta in the August of 1920. Gandhi moved the resolution calling for non-cooperation movement by the Congress on the issue of Khilafat. Now, what is interesting is that in the original draft of the resolution, there was only a single issue of Khilafat. But on the insistence of the Congress president, Vijay Raghavachari and others, demand for Swaraj and protest against the atrocious Rowlatt Act and the government's diabolic massacre at Jallianwala Bagh were included in the resolution. So in the 1920 resolution of the Congress party, Mohandas Gandhi wanted to only add the Khilafat issue. And it was only at the insistence of the others that the issue of Jallianwala Bagh, one of the worst massacres, was added. And it was admitted that the latter two issues were added for enlisting the cooperation of the Hindus in the movement. Gandhi wanted the issue to be Khilafat only, but he was reminded by the Congress party leaders that perhaps we should also add some things which appeal to the Hindus so that we can get their cooperation. Now I ask you, do you see any issues today in which you see token appeasement done for the Hindus, while the core issues of the Muslim society are paid the utmost attention? Now, it must be noted here that Gandhi had taken the Khilafat decision independently of the Congress, even before the session started. Like many other times, the Congress just followed him. Voices were warning about the dangers of a national body like Congress plunging into an anti-governmental movement, and more so on a fanatically religious issue like the Khilafat. Vijay Raghavachari, the president himself, sounded one such dissenting note. The motion moved by Gandhi was opposed by Chittaranjan Das, Bipin Chandra Pal, Annie Besant, C.F. Andrews, Rabindranath Tagore, even Jinnah. The motion faced a stiff opposition, but it was carried by 1886 votes for versus 884 votes against. It was Gandhi's overpowering personality which had made the Congress toe his line. It also must be noted that Gandhi had employed his ultimate astra, the weapon of non-cooperation against the British for the first time, not for the issue of Swaraj, but on the issue of Khilafat. Gandhi, while returning the Kaisar-e-Hind and the war medals awarded to him by the British for his services in those wars, he wrote, "Valuable as these honors have been to me, I cannot wear them with an easy conscience. So as long as my Muslim countrymen have to labor under the wrong done to their religious sentiment, I venture to return these medals in pursuance of the scheme of non-cooperation inaugurated today in connection with Khilafat movement." In those days, Khilafat and Swaraj had become almost synonymous terms. Gandhi even declared, "I would in order to achieve success in the Khilafat issue, even postpone the issue of Swaraj. This statement is so important, I am going to repeat it. Gandhi said, I would, in order to achieve success in the Khilafat issue, even postpone the issue of Swaraj. Not Gandhi alone, but many of the Congress stalwarts seem to have honestly believed that the Muslims could be won over through this move. Lokmanya Tilak told Gangadhar Rao Deshpande, the Karnataka leader, that the idea of helping the Muslims in their Khilafat agitation is a sound one, and Mahatma Gandhi's lead in this matter should be supported by all. Lala Lajpat Rai, in his presidential address to the extraordinary session of the Congress in Calcutta in 1920, stated that the Hindu-Muslim unity betokens the dawn of a new day in the history of India, and it will be extremely foolish and short-sighted to throw this chance which only comes once, perhaps in a century. However, he did sound a note of caution when he said that Hindus should go with their Muslim countrymen in the latter's campaign of non-cooperation only so far as it is consistent with our duty to the country. Swami Shraddhanand, the great Arya Samaj leader, was also one of those in the forefront of the agitation. His inspiring oration before a vast congregation of Muslims and Hindus inside the Jama Masjid in Delhi thrilled the audience. A popular photograph appearing in papers in those days was of Sri Shankaracharya of Puri, who was posing alongside Khilafat leaders like Muhammad Ali, Shaukat Ali, and Saifuddin Kichlu. In this overflowing effervescence of Hindu-Muslim unity, voices of reason and caution were drowned. Jinnah was another Muslim who was opposed to this issue. True to his words, Jinnah kept himself aloof from the Khilafat campaign and invited political exile for himself. There are also accounts of Jinnah telling the Congress leadership that by inviting the Maulvis and the Mullahs and by giving them legitimacy, they're making a very big mistake. It is interesting to know that Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, himself an outstanding authority on Islam because he studied in madrasas in Saudi Arabia, the only formal education that he received, he swore loyalty to the Turkish Caliphate. He felt it was necessary in the interest of international Islam. He also upheld jihad as a religious obligation of the Muslims against those who had occupied parts of Darul Islam. He said, while fighting against the Britishers was a religious duty, a jihad for the Muslims, it was a call of patriotism for the Hindus. So what he meant was that to fight against the British is just a matter of patriotism for the Hindus, but for us, it's something much, much more important. Jihad. Okay, so far we've seen that the Indian Muslims, the Congress party, led by Gandhi, they were all eager to re-establish the Khilafat and make Turkey into an Islamic state once again. But what was the response of the Turkish people? This is something that is not often talked about, probably because it is so embarrassing. When the situation was hotting up here in Bharat, the Sultan Abdul Majid himself, then a puppet in the hands of the British, had ran out of Turkey to Malta in a British ship so as to escape from the fury of his countrymen, the Turkish people, of course. The rise of a powerful nationalist state in Turkey did not fit into the global strategy of the British. Therefore, they tried to set up the Caliph against Kemal Pasha, and they prodded Aga Khan, yes, the same Aga Khan who has a famous Aga Khan Palace in Pune. He was prodded by the British to join hands with the Caliph. So then Aga Khan and Amir Ali, they wired to Kemal Pasha, begging him to save the Caliphate of Majid. When Kemal Pasha threw their wire into the waste paper basket, the two leaders personally went in a delegation to urge him to restore the full caliphate, to restore the full caliphal authority to Abdul Majid. Okay, so how did Kemal Pasha treat them? Kemal Pasha treated them with utter contempt and derided Aga Khan, who was a Shia, and Amir Ali, who was a Khoja, as heretics of Islam who had no business to advise the Sunni Turkish Muslims. He told them that you have no authority or the right to advise me, much like, the way the Arab Muslims and the Persian Muslims treat the Indian subcontinental Muslims of today. So now that he did not respond to their requests, Aga Khan and Amir Ali urged Kemal Pasha himself to assume the caliphal throne, to become the caliph himself. So Kemal Pasha confronted them with a simple and straight question. He said, "You being the subjects of English and French dominions, Would you be in a position to obey my commands if I were to assume the title of Caliph? The delegation was in a quandary, and they looked utterly foolish. Kamal Pasha then remarked, "If you are not in a position to carry out my orders, what is the use of my becoming a mere ornamental caliph?" Kamal Pasha said that it was ironical for Aga Khan and Amir Ali, who were pillars of British rule in India and had supported the British against Turkey, to come forward to advise Turkey on their national policy. Kamal Pasha then widely publicized the antics of Aga Khan and showed him up for what he was, a British stooge. Kamal Pasha not only declined scornfully to become the caliph, he laid the axe at the theocratic institution itself by abolishing the caliphate altogether. He said, "Islam is the religion of a defeated people. Since the day it has stepped on our soil, the condition of Turkey has steadily deteriorated." He dethroned Islam from the pedestal of the official state religion and transformed Turkey into a secular state. But the Khilafat leaders in India would not rest even after this humiliating rebuttal. Under the leadership of Ali brothers, they approached King Abdul Aziz ibn Saud of Arabia to become their new caliph. So since Kamal Pasha the Turk declined, they want an Arab to be their new daddy. He too knew that it was a British strategy. He put the Khilafat leaders in a tight corner by asking them, "If it is Islam you are so zealous about, why don't you join hands with Gandhi and free India of the British first? That is what Islam teaches. You come to me as a slave of the British, and it seems to me that you have come to lead me into a British trap." He told them to buzz off after the customary 3-day Arab hospitality, and he told them to give his salams to Gandhi. When Shaukat Ali, one of the Ali brothers, protested, Abdul Aziz got up, held the two Ali brothers by their beards, and knocked their heads together. But they still wouldn't stop. After being rejected by Turkey and the Arabs, the Khilafat leaders now approached the Reza Shah Pehla, the ruler of Iran. But the Shah, who was proud of his Iranian tradition, evinced little interest either in the Khilafat or in the affairs of the Indian Muslims. Rejected from 3 different places, Khilafat leaders had to return empty-handed. How weird is it that the Muslims in Bharat should have taken it upon themselves to support a cause such as Khilafat, which Turkey itself had rejected and banished from its land, and which all the other Muslim countries, the original Muslims, had refused to touch even with a pair of tongs. And how still even more strange that our national leadership also became so zealous over it and made it an issue for a national movement. Though the efforts of these Khilafat leaders fell like a house of cards, their fury inside Bharat did not abate. The fanatic mullahs and Maulvis began to preach to the gullible Muslim masses that Bharat was Darul Harb, a hostile country, a land of kafirs. That it was the command of Quran that Muslims should not stay in such a land even for a day, but should undertake hijrat, that is, they should emigrate to a Darul Islam, a land of Islam and Islamic State. While Muhammad Ali, the right-hand man of Gandhi, declared Bharat as Darul Harb, Maulana Abdul Bari circulated a fatwa, a religious command, for hijrat, immigration. And nearly 20,000 poor and ignorant Muslims, believing sincerely in their leader's words, left their age-old houses and homes and began to trek to Afghanistan, their dreamland of Darul Islam, the dream Islamic state. But hijrat, this immigration for them, proved to be a disastrous nightmare, because the Afghans mercilessly stopped them at the borders. They looted them and turned them back as unwanted guests. Many of them succumbed to the rigors of the hazardous journey. Battered and bruised and their dreams shattered, they came back to Bharat, the Darul Harb, the land of kafirs, to seek security and peace. But on their return to their places, they found themselves homeless and penniless, their properties having already been sold out for peanuts. So in a very short matter of time, the Indian Muslims get rejected by the Turks, by the Arabs, by the Persians, and the Afghans, none of whom are willing to take them on board. This is what Nehru wrote about the mentality of Indian Muslims in those days. He said, "In the troubled days of Turkey war, both Muslims and Hindus sympathized with it for different reasons. For the Muslims, it was a part of religious duty and an expression of pan-Islamic urge. For the Hindus, it was a sympathy for a foreign country in distress. Such Muslims searched for their national roots elsewhere. To some extent, they found them in the Afghan and the Mughal periods of India, but this was not quite enough to fill this vacuum. This search for cultural roots led Indian Muslims to Islamic history and to the periods when Islam was a conquering and creative force in Baghdad, Spain, Constantinople, Central Asia, and elsewhere. So, what Nehru essentially is saying here is that the Muslims of India had identity crisis pro max. At another place, Nehru depicted the Khilafat period as representing a strange mixture of nationalism and politics, and religion and mysticism and fanaticism. But more than the immediate issue of the Khilafat agitation, the tragic results that followed had a deranging and snowballing effect on the entire future course of Indian politics. A terrible and gruesome fallout of the Khilafat experiment was witnessed in Kerala. By 1921, the movement had totally fizzled out. No wonder that issue, having no roots in the soil of Bharat, should have dried up and collapsed as suddenly as it had erupted. But in Kerala, a vicious propaganda was set afloat among the local Muslims, the Moplahs, that the Khilafat agitation was crowned with success, that the British regime had come to an end and Khilafat had been reinstated. Now was the time to eliminate all Kafirs and establish Darul Islam, they were told. The Moplah zealots' imagination was set aflame by this call of their Khilafat leaders, the Mullahs and the Maulvis. Soon they anointed one Muhammad Haji as their caliph and proclaimed jihad. Their fury was first directed against the British. Grim and bitter encounters ensued. The extent and intensity of the Moplah outburst can be gauged from the following figures. Among the rioters, the number killed was 2,266. 1,615 were wounded, 5,688 were captured, and 38,656 surrendered. Finally, the Khilafat king and his close followers fell into the British hand. They were court-martialed and summarily hanged. But the Moplahs, now frustrated in their encounter with the British, now turned their unspent wrath against the unsuspecting Hindus. For the Hindus in their eyes were as much Kafirs as the British. The Hindus who had lost themselves in the enchanting hullabaloo of Hindu-Muslim Bhai Bhai and Allahu Akbar became an easy prey to the Moplah onslaught. Allahu Akbar had in fact become the battle cry of the Khilafat movement all over the country. Gandhi himself said that Allahu Akbar was greater than Bharat Mata ki Jai, since Allah the God was greater than Bharat Mata, the country. But to the common Muslim masses, Allahu Akbar was simply a battle cry against the Kafirs. According to the report of the Inquiry Committee of the Servants of India Society, the number of Hindus murdered was 1,500. The number of those forcibly converted to Islam, 20,000. And the property looted was about 3 crore rupees. There was no end to the molestations and abductions of Hindu women. Dr. Annie Besant wrote about this. She said, "They murdered and plundered abundantly and killed or drove away all Hindus who would not apostatize. Somewhere about 100,000 of people were driven from their homes with nothing but the clothes they had on, stripped of everything." She also accused the Khilafat religious preachers for all these terrible atrocities. J. Campbell, chief of the Central Intelligence Department, and even Theodore Morrison, a champion of Muslim separatism, held that Khilafat leaders were responsible for inciting racial hatred resulting in the Moplah carnage. In Malabar, as in Rajasthan during the Mughal reign, hundreds of Hindu women preferred death to dishonor and immolated themselves by whatever means that lay at their command. The Hindu women of Malabar, who were the victims of the Moplah massacre, they wrote a petition to Lady Reading, the wife of the Viceroy. The petition said, "It is possible that your ladyship is not fully appraised of all the horrors and atrocities, of the many wells and tanks filled up with the mutilated, but often only half-dead bodies of our nearest and dearest ones, who refused to abandon the faith of our fathers, of pregnant women cut to pieces and left on the roadside and in the jungles with the unborn baby protruding from the mangled corpse, of our innocent and helpless children torn from our arms and done to death before our eyes, and of our husbands and fathers tortured, flayed and burnt alive, of our helpless sisters forcibly carried away from the midst of kith and kin and subjected to every shame and outrage which the vile and the brutal imagination of these inhuman hellhounds could conceive of thousands of our homes reduced to cinder mounds out of sheer savagery and a wanton spirit of destruction, of our places of worship desecrated and destroyed, and of the images of deities shamefully insulted by putting the entrails of slaughtered cows where flower garlands used to lie, or else smashed to pieces. We remember how driven out of our native hamlets we wandered, starving and naked, in the jungles and forests. There were some people who appealed to these Moplah Muslims to stop this massacre in the name of Gandhi, to follow the ways of peace and non-violence. But they replied that Gandhi was a kafir. How can he be our leader? The Congress became more than anything else anxious that the Moplah affair should not be allowed to poison the amicable atmosphere created between Hindu and Muslims because of the Khilafat issue. In the Subjects Committee meeting of the Congress, it was proposed to condemn outright the Moplah riots, but as discussion continued, it got gradually toned down. The resolution finally adopted by the Congress Working Committee, while expressing its sense of regret over the violent deeds of Moplah in certain areas of Malabar, added that, while condemning violence on the part of the Moplahs, the Working Committee desires it to be known that the evidence in its possession shows that the provocation beyond endurance was given to the Moplahs, and that the reports published by and on behalf of the government have given a one-sided and highly exaggerated account of the wrongs done by the Moplahs. The Congress resolution claimed that the number of conversions were just 3. The Congress resolution essentially said that the reports of the British police and the other criminal reports emerging out of the Malabar region are false, that all the criminal and terrible acts carried out by the Muslims of Malabar were provoked. They built this false narrative, which unfortunately continues to this day, that it was some sort of a rebellion against wealthy landlords of some sort. But that is not the truth. It was simply a jihad, a massacre of Hindus by the southern Muslims. And one of the reasons for that was that the so-called nationalist Muslims of the Congress party were not ready to discuss this or condemn their fellow Muslims, much like it happens today. Swami Shraddhanand points out how during the discussions on the resolution, these so-called nationalist Muslims of the Congress had come out openly and aggressively in their communal colors. He says, the Hindu members themselves proposed amendments till the resolution was reduced to condemning only certain individuals who had been guilty of the above crimes. But some of the Muslim leaders could not bear even this. Maulana Fakir and other Maulanas, of course, opposed the resolution, and it was no surprise. But I was surprised when an out-and-out nationalist like Maulana Hazrat Mohani opposed the resolution on the ground that as the Moplah country no longer remained Darul Aman but became Darul Harb, and as they suspected the Hindus of collusion with the British enemies of the Moplahs, therefore the Moplahs were right in presenting the Quran or the sword to the Hindus. A member of the Congress party, who was considered a nationalist, said that the Moplah Muslims were right in offering the choice of the sword or the Quran to the Hindus. And if the Hindus became Muslims to save themselves from death, it was a voluntary change of faith and not a forcible conversion. Yes, this is what he says. Even this harmless resolution condemning some of the Moplahs was not unanimously passed, but had to be accepted by a majority of votes only. The so-called nationalist Muslim leaders of Congress absolutely refused not just to condemn this violence by Muslims on Hindus, but they even refused to support the official, much watered-down resolution of the Congress party. The doctrine of pan-Islamism, Darul Harb, cutting across national boundaries, now began to be openly preached. Muhammad Ali, in his address to the Muslim League session in 1924, said that parts of the frontier province, which legitimately belonged to the country beyond India's border of River Sindhu, should be given back to those people. And this statement of his was received with a loud applause from the audience. It was all too patent that the Muslim mind was fully inflamed against the Kafir Hindu because of the incessant propaganda of the Khilafat Muslim leaders. The Khilafat Muslim leaders had even sent telegrams to Moplah rebels, extolling them as heroes fighting for the glory of their religion. Gandhi felt that something should be done to retrieve the situation. So he took one step further than the Congress resolution to win back the Muslims. Not condemn, but to win back the Muslims. In a reference to Moplah rioters, he said, this is what Gandhi said about the Moplah rioters, the Moplah Muslims who killed Hindus, pulled out the fetuses of barely alive Hindu pregnant women, killed children, raped them, made women into sex slaves, and killed their fathers and brothers and husbands. This is what Gandhi said about them. He said, they are a brave, God-fearing people who were fighting for what they consider as religion, and in a manner which they considered religious. Annie Besant's comments on the Islamic character of Moplah outrage are worth recalling. She said, "Malabar has taught us what Islamic rule still means, and we do not want to see another specimen of the Khilafat Raj in India. How sympathy with the Moplahs is felt by the Muslims outside Malabar has been proved by the defense raised by them for the fellow believers and by Mr. Gandhi himself, who stated that they had acted as they believed that religion taught them to act. I fear that this is true, but there is no place in a civilized land for people who drive away out of the country those who refuse to apostatize from their ancestral faiths." The Khilafat movement gave birth to two long-range catastrophic results. First, the Muslim fanaticism secured a position of prestige in Indian politics thereafter and even till today. Their religious loyalty took precedence over national loyalty. Their extraterritorial loyalties were set aflame. The Muslim population, so long divided among various groups and political pools, now got crystallized into a single direction. Their thinking got focused towards a definite goal. Secondly, a new fanatic leadership riding on the crest of Khilafat came to wield the reins of Muslim leadership thereafter. In this connection, it is instructive to understand how the Ali brothers, Maulana Muhammad Ali and Maulana Shaukat Ali, came to occupy the position of the right hand and the left hand of Gandhi. Gandhi writes, "I was seeking the friendship of good Muslims and was eager to understand the Musliman mind through contact with their purest and the most patriotic representatives. I therefore never needed any pressure to go with them wherever they took me in order to get into intimate touch with them." And the search of Gandhi took him to the Ali brothers, the purest and the most patriotic apparently, who had been sentenced to 2 years imprisonment by the government for their seditious speeches at the All India Khilafat Conference on the 8th of July 1921. Gandhi proceeded to win their friendship and confidences. He says, "I opened correspondence with the government for the release of the brothers. In that connection, I studied the brothers' views and activities about the Khilafat. I had discussions with Muslim friends. I felt that if I would become a true friend of the Muslims, I must render all possible help in securing the release of the brothers and a just settlement of the Khilafat question." To what extent Gandhi was prepared to go in this direction is shown by a significant episode from those days. The Prince of Wales was to visit India in 1921. The civil disobedience movement was still going on. So the Viceroy, Lord Reading, who was keen on seeing that the Prince's visit was not boycotted by the public, made an offer to Madan Mohan Malviya that the government would release all the arrested congressmen and summon a roundtable conference to settle the future constitution if the Congress agreed to call off the movement immediately. But when these terms of agreement were communicated to Gandhi, he insisted on the inclusion of release of Ali brothers and their associates as part of the agreement. The British said that we'll release all the congressmen, but Gandhi said no, you also have to include the Ali brothers and their associates. The Viceroy refused to agree to this, so the proposal fell through. Chittaranjan Das, who had taken a leading part in these parleys, was furious, and he remarked that the chance of a lifetime had been lost. Muhammad Ali was a total stranger to Arabic and Persian languages. The status of Maulana was the privilege of only those who were proficient in those languages. But a special rule was made in his case, and the status was conferred on him only for his proficiency in tabligh, that is, the conversion of non-Muslims to Islam. Neither of the Ali brothers ever concealed their commitment to the separatist Muslim ambition. Muhammad Ali had, even from the presidential chair of the Congress in 1923, justified every one of the moves of separatist Muslim politics. He commended the approach of Sir Sayyid as wise and upheld the separate electorates as being congenial to the advent of Hindu-Muslim unity. He considered the partition of Bengal as having benefited the Muslims and regularly condemned its annulment as betrayal unparalleled in the history of Indian politics. He even suggested that the country be divided into different reserved areas where each religion could have the monopoly of proselytization. He asked the Hindus either to absorb the depressed classes immediately or to allow the Muslims to convert them to Islam. It was such personalities as these who were projected as leaders of Congress in general and Muslims in particular. In the Congress sessions, they were the propped-up heroes. At the Amritsar session of the Congress in December 1919, when the Ali brothers entered the pandal and ascended to the stage with their fur caps with crescent and black gowns, the whole of the Congress audience became transported to ecstasy and rent the sky with cheers to their names. Gandhi continued to spread his protecting wings over the various acts of omission and commission of his Khilafat colleagues. Swami Shraddhanand mentions one such incident at a Khilafat conference in Nagpur, where he had accompanied Gandhi. He said, "The ayats of the Quran recited by Maulanas on that occasion contained frequent references to jihad against and the killing of kafir. But when I drew his attention to this phase of the Khilafat movement, Gandhi smiled and said, 'They are only alluding to the British bureaucracy.' In reply, I said that it was all subversive of the idea of non-violence, and when needed, the Mohammedan Maulanas would not refrain from using these verses against the Hindus. And we have already seen how, in the case of Moplah riots, Swami Shraddhanand's words have proved to be true." The Swami had given one more instance of how Khilafat leaders enjoyed indulgence at the hands of Gandhi. He says, "While people came to the conclusion that the burning of foreign cloth was a religious duty of Indians, Das, Nehru and other topmost leaders made bonfire of cloth worth thousands. But the Khilafat Muslimans got permission from Mahatma Ji to send all foreign cloth for the use of the Turkish brothers. This, again, was a great shock to me. So while the Hindus, as a part of the non-cooperation movement, burnt foreign cloth, the Muslims sent it all to the Turkish brothers." The Ali brothers had more than once affirmed their loyalty to the doctrine of pan-Islamism. Muhammad Ali had, in 1921, addressed a letter to Amanullah, the Amir of Afghanistan, inviting him to invade Bharat. Yes, yet another incident of an Indian Muslim inviting a foreign Muslim to invade Bharat. The British got scent of this and they arrested the Ali brothers. The following statement of Muhammad Ali before the jury in the Sessions Court with regards to his stand only confirmed his complicity. He says, "If His Majesty, the Amir of Afghanistan, is impelled by the same religious motive to contemplate jihad against those who are in wrongful occupation of the Jaziratul Arab and the holy places, who aim at the weakening of Islam and deny to us the full freedom to advocate its cause, then the clear law of Islam requires that no Musliman should render any assistance against the Amir. And if the jihad approaches his region, every Musliman must join the Mujahideen and assist them to the best of his or her power." And this is very much in line with the doctrine of Islam, doctrine of jihad, that if you are in a land controlled by the kafir and a co-religionist of yours, even if he might be from a different country, different culture, different ethnic background, if he were to invade your country with the army, you're not supposed to resist him or work against him. You're supposed to help him in the best way that you can. And that is the divine command. Even though Muhammad Ali said all these things, he was released on a written assurance that he was not opposed to the British. It is on record, again, that in 1921, when the Khilafat agitation was at its peak, Muhammad Ali sent a wire to Amanullah urging him not to enter into any kind of peaceful agreement with Britain. Muhammad Ali then complained to Swami Shraddhanand about the Congress leaders taking him to task for this act. When the Swami also criticized him, Muhammad Ali took him aside and gave him a handwritten draft of a wire. Swami Shraddhanand writes, "What was my astonishment when I saw the draft of the self-same telegram in the peculiar handwriting of the father of the non-violent, non-cooperation movement." So Muhammad Ali said that he was advised by Gandhi to write to the Amir of Afghanistan, telling him not to sign a peaceful agreement with the British. And when Swami Shraddhanand confronted Gandhi with this, Gandhi replied that he did not remember writing it. Rumors became rife that the Ali brothers would again be put behind bars on charges of treason. But Gandhi joined the issue with the government and declared at a public meeting on 10th of May 1921 in Allahabad that I cannot understand why the Ali brothers are going to be arrested, as the rumor goes, and why I am to remain free. They had done nothing which I would not do. If they had sent a message to the Amir of Afghanistan, I also would send one to inform the Amir that if he came, no Indian, so long as I can help it, would help the government to drive him back. Writing in Young India in May of 1921, Gandhi declared that I would, in a sense, certainly assist the Amir of Afghanistan if he waged war against the British government. That is to say, I would openly tell my countrymen that it would be a crime to help a government which has lost the confidence of the nation to remain in power. Gandhi had to face a barrage of criticisms and resentment from his admirers, as well as others, for his support to the fanatic Ali brothers in the Afghan affair. Prominent personalities like Srinivas Shastri, C.Y. Chintamani, the editor of Leader, and C.F. Andrews, Gandhi's close confidant, told Gandhi that his speeches and writings were undoubtedly such as to justify the act of Muhammad Ali's invitation to the Amir of Afghanistan. But how did the Muslim leaders respond to these over-generous gesture of Gandhi? Hakim Ajmal Khan was considered a genuine 24-carat nationalist by the Congress party members. While presiding over the Khilafat conference in Ahmedabad in December of 1922, he gave out his inner conviction, with Gandhi and everybody else sitting by his side, regarding the glorious future awaiting pan-Islamic empire. He said, "India on the one side and Asia Minor on the other are but two extreme links in a chain of future Islamic federation, which are gradually but surely joining together all intermediate states in one great system." Yes, he wanted India to be a part of this pan-Islamic empire. In 1924, Maulana Muhammad Ali went a step ahead and launched a personal diatribe against Gandhi and made this appalling statement at Aligarh and Ajmer. Muhammad Ali, for whom Gandhi did so much, fought with the British for this Muhammad Ali and his brother, wrote to them, trying to get them out of jail, supported them all the way through, even when they invited the Amir of Afghanistan to invade India. This Muhammad Ali, what did he say about Gandhi? He said, "However pure Mr. Gandhi's character may be, he must appear to me, from the point of view of religion, inferior to any Muslim, even though he be without character." In simpler terms, what Maulana Muhammad Ali is saying is that Gandhi, no matter how great he must be, he is still inferior to me than the worst of the Muslims, just because he's not one of us, because he's a kafir. A year later, when he was questioned at a public meeting in Lucknow about this, the Maulana accepted and even improved upon his previous saying. He said that, "Yes, according to my religion and creed, I do hold an adulterous and a fallen Muslim to be better than Mr. Gandhi." In very clear words, he said that he considers the worst Muslim, the most adulterous, corrupt Muslim, to be better than Mr. Gandhi. But the sorrows of Khilafat did not end with these terrible consequences. More were in store, and as days passed, they assumed newer and more disastrous dimensions. The Muslims had launched a crusade for converting Hindus, and the hapless Hindus were being harassed and victimized everywhere. The intensity of the crusading zeal of Muslims could be gauged from the way Dr. Saifuddin Kichlu, a well-known so-called nationalist Muslim leader, uttered a warning to Hindus in a public speech at Lahore early in 1925. He said, "Listen, my dear Hindu brothers, listen very attentively. If you put obstacles in the path of our Tanzim movement and do not give us our rights, we shall make common cause with Afghanistan or some other Musliman power and establish our rule in this country." So essentially, he's telling the Hindus that if you try to get into our way of making conversions, we're going to call one of the external powers, external Musliman powers to India, and they will beat you up, and we will have Islamic State in Bharat. The speed with which the conversion drive of the Muslim Maulvis and Mullahs was yielding fruit was highly commended in a report prepared by Dr. Abdullah Surawardi, a one-time prominent leader of the Swaraj Party of Chittaranjan Das and member of the Indian Central Committee. He said, "Islam claims every year converts to Islam, who, along with the descendants of the earlier converts, are amongst its most zealous followers and adherents. They flock by the thousands to Mecca, the center and cradle of Islam, and cast into the fiery furnace of the discipline of the annual pilgrimage, they return to India purged and purified, and adopting the manners and customs of Arabia, become as distinct from the Hindus as the Hindus are from the Chinese and the Jews." The frenzy of jihad generated by the Khilafat provocations soon spread like a wildfire. Beginning in 1922 in a few places in Punjab and Bengal, by 1923 it enveloped many other provinces at Amritsar, Lahore, Panipat, Multan, and some other cities in Punjab, at Moradabad in Meerut, Allahabad, Saharanpur in UP, at Bhagalpur in Bihar, at Gulbarga in Hyderabad state, and at Delhi itself. At most of these places, it was the Muslims joining the Muharram procession who had sparked off the outbreak and given the signal for widespread uprising against the Hindus. Bhai Parmanand, a great venerated Hindu leader of Punjab, personally inquired into the Saharanpur riot and reported, "There is no doubt left in my mind about the key role played by the Khilafat leaders in fomenting the orgy of murder, loot, and arson of Hindus. It appears certain that the main instigation for the riots raging all over the country has been provided by the Khilafat stir." Rajendra Prasad, who would later become the first president of India, has not minced words in pinpointing the Muslim complicity in these riots. He said, "Towards the latter part of 1922, there occurred serious riots in Multan in which Hindu places of worship were desecrated. Many Hindus were killed and many Hindu houses were looted and burnt. This was the first of a large number of communal riots which continued for several years and which occurred in almost all parts of the country. Hundreds of Hindus fell victim to the Muslim barbarism. Countless Hindu women were raped and kidnapped. Practically every Hindu festival, Ramlila, Durga Puja, Holi, Kanpati, was a signal for the fierce Muslim assault." Gandhi, giving his reactions through Young India in 1924, wrote, "The Hindus have written to me complaining that I was responsible for unifying and awakening the Muslimans and giving prestige to the Maulvis, which they never had before. Now that the Khilafat question was over, the awakened Muslimans have proclaimed a kind of jihad against the Hindus. The tales that are reported from Bengal of outrages upon Hindu women are the most disquieting, if they were even half true. My own experience but confirms the opinion that the Musliman, as a rule, is a bully, and the Hindu, as a rule, is a coward. Should the Hindu blame the Musliman for his cowardice? Where there are cowards, there will always be bullies. Muslimans of Saharanpur can offer no defense for their conduct, but as a Hindu, I am more ashamed of Hindu cowardice than I am angry at the Musliman bullying. Why didn't the owner of the houses that were looted die in the attempt to defend their possessions? Where were the relatives of the outraged sisters at the time of outrage? My non-violence does not admit running away from danger and leaving the dear ones unprotected." Even now, he is not blaming the Muslims. He is telling the Hindus that you're cowards. Do not forget that not long ago he was telling the Hindus that they should be prepared to die for the Muslims, die with the Muslims. He was telling them to be peaceful, ahimsa. And now, when everything's happened, when the Hindus have been killed, their women have been raped, kidnapped, now he's telling them, why are you such cowards? The Kohat riots from 9th of September 1924 onwards deserve a special mention, for they sent a wave of shudder throughout the country. Hindus were just 5% of the population of Kohat, a small town in the frontier. As many as 150 Hindus were murdered. The entire Hindu population had to seek shelter in Rawalpindi, which was 320 kilometers away. This terrible death dance of murder, rape, loot and abduction, etc., that was let loose on the Hindus by the Muslims, forced Gandhi, accompanied by Shaukat Ali, to visit Rawalpindi. And after the visit, what did Shaukat Ali say? He said something that we are very familiar with. After every riot, the same excuse is thrust in our faces. Shaukat Ali said that both the sides were responsible for the disturbances. Riots raging throughout the country had severely shocked Gandhi, especially the Kohat tragedy. He decided to undertake a 21-day fast. He said, "My hopelessness was still more unbearable. Nothing, evidently, that I say or write can bring the two communities together. And therefore, I'm imposing upon myself the fast." And how useless Mr. Gandhi's fasts were, we pretty much know by now. He remarked that things had come to such a pass that the Hindus and Muslims who just 2 years ago, apparently, were working together as friends were now fighting like cats and dogs. During the last days of Gandhi's fast, Mahadev Desai had once asked him for what error of his he was undergoing this penance. Gandhi replied, "My error? Well, I may be charged with having committed a breach of faith with the Hindus. I asked them to lay their life and property at the disposal of the Muslims for the protection of their holy places. Even today, I'm asking them to practice ahimsa, to settle quarrels by dying, but not by killing. And what do I find to be the result? How many sisters came to me with complaints? Hindu women are in mortal terror of the Musliman gundas. In many places, they fear to go out alone. How can I now ask the Hindus to put up with everything patiently? I gave them the assurance that the friendship of Muslims was bound to bear good fruit. I asked them to befriend them regardless of the result. It is not in my power today to make good that assurance. Who listens to me? And yet, I must ask the Hindus, even today, to die and not to kill. Certainly seems similar to a lot of the secular messaging that goes on nowadays and has gone on for the last many decades. And it does make one wonder whether this will repeat once again. And perhaps some other leader in the future will say that I have failed the Hindus yet again. The close of the fast was marked by a unity conference, but it proved to be just an eyewash. For on that very day, a fresh bout of riots broke out at Allahabad, Lucknow, and other places. The Delhi Muslims refused to accept Gandhi as the final arbiter. Gandhi too ultimately confessed in private that the unity talks fell through because of Muslim opposition. Muhammad Ali, the former friend of Mr. Gandhi, addressed his fellow Muslims in January of 1929 at an all-party Muslim conference, and he told them with confidence that in all their religious battles in the past, one Muslim had vanquished 3 Kafirs. And this is where the belief that the Pakistanis have that one Pakistani is equal to 10 Indian soldiers comes from. With the end of the Khilafat issue, the utility of Congress had exhausted itself for the Ali brothers. They said goodbye to the Congress and to Mr. Gandhi. Speaking at the All India Muslim Conference at Bombay in April of 1930, Muhammad Ali said that he refused to join Gandhi because, he said, his movement is not a movement for the complete independence of India, but for making the 70 million of Indian Muslimans dependents of the Hindu Mahasabha. During those days, an open challenge was often issued by the Muslim leaders, who said that let there be a 4th Panipat battle, to which Madan Mohan Malviya often replied that yes, we accept the challenge. The eruption of Muslim communal frenzy in the form of Moplah and other riots all over the country helped to remove the blinkers from the eyes of many Hindu leaders. Chittaranjan Das, who was the Congress president at the 1922 session, confessed openly that Hindu-Muslim unity was an impossibility. In 1924, Rabindranath Tagore's fear about the divided loyalty of Muslims appeared in the Times of India edition of 18th of April. He wrote, "A very important factor which is making it almost impossible for Hindu-Muslim unity to become an accomplished fact is that the Muslims cannot confine their patriotism to any one country. I had frankly asked many Muslims whether, in the event of any Mohammedan power invading India, they would stand side by side with their Hindu neighbors to defend their common land. I was not satisfied with the reply I got from them. I can definitely state that even such men as Mr. Muhammad Ali has declared that under no circumstance is it permissible for any Mohammedan, whatever be his country, to stand against any other Mohammedan." Dr. Annie Besant was another top leader of the Congress who realized the folly of the Khilafat policy. She wrote, "If India were independent, the Muslim part of the population would become an immediate peril to India's freedom. Allying themselves with Afghanistan, Balochistan, Persia, Iraq, Arabia, Turkey, and Egypt, and with such of the tribes of Central Asia who are Muslims, they would rise to place India under the rule of Islam and would establish Musliman rule." Even Gokhale, who was the liberal figure of Indian politics, was forced to say that the 7 crores of Muslims here have become more or less hostile to our national aspirations. The Hindu leaders were gravely perturbed by one more aspect. The Muslim leaders were repeatedly claiming that in the event of the quitting of the British, either out of sheer exhaustion or disgust, the integrity of India could only be safeguarded by the Muslims, for they alone could secure the sympathy and support of their trustworthy co-religionists residing beyond the northwestern border. It was in accordance with this conviction and strategy that Muslim leaders, including those in the Congress, were clamoring for greater recruitment of the hilly people of the northwest frontier to the army. The threat implied in this plan was sending shivers down the spine of many a Hindu leader. And if you'll recall, much later on, it was Savarkar who encouraged the Indians to join the army, because by then the percentage of Muslims in the army had greatly increased. And Savarkar, even at that time, had foreseen that in the event of a partition, this massive amount of well-trained Muslims in the army is going to be a big, big problem for the Hindus. And you can imagine how much worse the anti-Hindu partition riots would have been had so many Hindus not joined the army on Savarkar's appeal. In 1924, Lala Lajpat Rai wrote to Chittaranjan Das that, "I am not afraid of the 7 crores of Muslims of Hindustan. But I think the 7 crores of Hindustani Muslims plus the armed host of Afghanistan, Central Asia, Arabia, Mesopotamia, and Turkey will be irresistible. I do honestly and sincerely believe in the necessity or desirability of Hindu-Muslim unity. I'm also fully prepared to trust the Muslim leaders, but what about the injunctions of the Quran and the Hadith? The leaders cannot override them. Are we then doomed? This is what Lala Lajpat Rai asked in 1924, almost 100 years ago. But all such voices of reason and caution were simply brushed aside. Whoever dared to utter a word of warning about the dangers of Muslim belligerence was immediately dubbed communal. They no longer had any place in the Congress. Achyut Patwardhan, one of the erstwhile socialist stalwarts of the Congress, in a remarkably candid and self-critical analysis of the Congress policy with regards to Khilafat, wrote in 1968 that, "It is, however, useful to recognize our share of this error of misdirection. To begin with, I am convinced that looking back upon the course of development of the freedom movement, the Himalayan error of Gandhi's leadership was the support he extended on behalf of the Congress and the Indian people to the Khilafat movement at the end of the First World War. This has proved to be a disastrous error which has brought in its wake a series of harmful consequences. On merits, it was a thoroughly reactionary step. The Khilafat was totally unworthy of support of the progressive Muslims. Kamal Pasha established this fact by the abolition of the Khilafat, which was welcomed by enlightened Muslim opinion the world over. And Kamal Pasha was undoubtedly a hero of all the young Muslims straining against imperial domination. But apart from the fact that Khilafat was an unworthy reactionary cause, Mahatma Gandhi had to align himself. He was thus unwittingly responsible for thrusting upon the Indian Muslims a theocratic orthodoxy of the Maulvis. Maulana Muhammad Ali's speeches read today appear strangely incoherent and out of tune with the spirit of secular political freedom. The Congress movement, which released the forces of religious liberalism and reform amongst the Hindus and evoked a rational scientific outlook, placed the Muslims of India under the spell of orthodoxy and religious superstition by their support to the Khilafat leadership. So now that you've heard the whole episode, I ask you the same question that I asked you in the beginning. Do you see any similarities with the Khilafat movement, what happened 100 years ago, to things that are going on today in the political situation of India? Do you see any such political mistakes being committed? Do you see any political leaders who are about to commit such mistakes? As I have said again and again and again, those who do not learn from their history are doomed to repeat it. Well, I hope you gained some knowledge from this episode. And if you did, please subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, in whichever way you listen to this. I'm also on social media, so please follow me on Instagram, Twitter, WhatsApp, Telegram. The name is the same, Indologia, Indologia. Do feel free to send me your feedback, your views, any questions or any suggestions that you have. You can always DM me on Instagram. Until the next time I see you, Jai Hind, Vande Mataram.